The invitation had seemed innocent enough when my daughter had called me earlier that week. "Mom, come over for dinner on Friday," she had said, her voice cheerful with that unmistakable undertone of excitement. "It's just us. We're trying a new recipe, and I think you'll love it." I knew better. The unease started as soon as I walked up the driveway to my daughter's house. The air was crisp with winter's bite, but inside, something felt colder. I could hear laughter from the kitchen, my daughter's light, musical giggle, and a deeper, sharper chuckle that made my skin crawl. That chuckle belonged to him, my son-in-law. I paused at the door, forcing a polite smile, trying to shake the chill crawling up my spine. He opened the door before I could knock, grinning that smug, patronizing smile that always made my blood simmer. "Ah, mother-in-law," he said, voice dripping with false warmth. Come in, come in. You're just in time for a special treat." "A special treat?" That was the phrase that made my hands tighten into fists. In my experience, when he said special, it never meant kindness. Usually, it meant he had schemed something, planned a way to embarrass or undermine me. Subtle, cutting, hidden beneath civility. I stepped inside, placing my coat on the rack with calm precision, hiding the tension coiling in my chest. My daughter appeared behind him, eyes sparkling, unaware, or unwilling to see, the thinly veiled animosity that lingered in the room. "Mom, you're just in time," she said, cheerfully oblivious. "Dinner's ready." The dining table was set beautifully. Candles flickered, casting a warm glow over polished silverware, delicate plates, and a steaming dish at the center. But I didn't need to taste it to know. This was no ordinary meal. Every fiber in my being screamed caution. He slid the dish toward me, his grin widening in that infuriating way. "Eat up, you old fool," he said, emphasizing the words with mockery. "It's a special dish, just for you." I froze. My hand hovered above the fork as my mind raced. The words stung, but my voice remained steady. "Thank you," I said softly, hiding the fury that burned just beneath my skin. He watched me closely, like a cat waiting for a mouse to twitch, his eyes glinting with expectation. I pretended to smile, pretending to lift a fork, pretending to be unaware. But inside, I was already plotting, already thinking of ways to reclaim the dignity he so arrogantly challenged. Dinner began. The first few bites were cautious, measured, not because of taste, but because of calculation. I observed him, the subtle twitch of satisfaction every time he thought he'd gotten under my skin, the way he leaned back, smug, expecting some reaction, any reaction that would show he had won. But I was not reacting. I was waiting for the right moment, waiting to turn the table, to make him see that underestimation was his greatest mistake. And as he laughed again, too loudly, a sound meant to belittle, I felt the quiet, growing warmth of anticipation in my chest. Yes, he thought he was in control. Yes, he thought he could humiliate me with a smile and a special dish. But I had patience on my side. And patience, I knew, was far more powerful than arrogance. By the time I set my fork down, after pretending to taste the first bite, I had already made a decision. I would play along, I would endure, and when the moment came, when the moment came, he would regret underestimating me more than anything he had ever feared. For now, though, I smiled, small and controlled, and waited. I held the fork poised in my hand, staring at the dish as though I were considering a delicate piece of art rather than a trap disguised as a meal. Every instinct screamed caution. Every memory of past slights whispered, "Asterisk, he is testing you." "Don't be fooled." Asterisk, the son-in-law, sat across from me, his grin still plastered on, eyes gleaming with that smug satisfaction he thought no one could ever penetrate. He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped loosely on his lap, as if he'd just delivered the punchline of a joke only he understood. I chewed slowly on the image of his overconfidence. I could almost taste it bitter, smug, overripe. I took the first pretend bite, letting the fork barely touch my lips, just enough to make him believe his trap had worked. "You like it?" he asked, eyebrows raised, his tone thick with amusement. "Oh, yes," I said softly, savoring the word as one would a fine wine. "It's interesting." He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Interesting, huh? I knew you'd appreciate it. Not many people can handle this recipe." I nodded, the smallest movement, measured and careful, as if the compliment had gone unnoticed. My mind was already mapping the next step. I had seen him turn his back just once, when serving my daughter's plate. That single moment of inattentiveness was all I needed, as he leaned over to adjust a napkin or refill a glass, some minor distraction. I waited. Patience was everything. I lifted my plate ever so slightly, swapping it with my daughter's plate with precise, silent movements. The warmth of the stolen victory was already rising in my chest. He didn't notice, of course, he didn't. He never noticed. That was his mistake, arrogance. He believed he had orchestrated the entire evening, from the menu to my reaction, from my every move to my every expression. But I had been 2 steps ahead from the moment I crossed the threshold. Dinner continued. My daughter chatted happily, oblivious, laughing at a story her husband told, unaware that the battlefield of subtlety and cunning stretched right across the table. I smiled gently, answering her occasionally, my eyes on the swapped plates. Every detail mattered. Every gesture, every word, every controlled movement of my hands. The swap was complete, and the trap had become his own. A small shiver of satisfaction traveled down my spine, and I almost laughed quietly, internally, at how easily he'd walked into his own scheme. I pretended to eat now, the fork hovering, tasting the wrong dish, keeping up appearances while the real dish sat safely swapped. It was a dance, a slow, careful dance where one misstep could ruin everything. But I had rehearsed this dance in my mind countless times, anticipating every twitch, every smirk, every self-satisfied glance he would make. And then, at last, the final bite. I set my fork down, leaning back, letting my chest rise with the calm control of someone who knew the game was about to turn. He leaned forward, sensing perhaps that something was off, but too proud to question it openly. For an hour I watched, waited, and let the tension thicken like steam, rising from the untouched dishes. Every second was a heartbeat closer to the moment when he would realize that his arrogance had blinded him, that his special dish was now his own undoing. And I smiled quietly to myself, the kind of smile that doesn't show teeth but promises reckoning. Patience, I reminded myself, is a far deadlier weapon than anger. Because soon, very soon, the consequences of his pride would reach him. An hour passed, and the atmosphere in the dining room had shifted, though no one yet realized it. The candles flickered, shadows stretching across the walls, as if the room itself were holding its breath. I had remained calm the entire time, pretending to nibble, pretending to engage in light conversation with my daughter. My son-in-law, however, had begun to fidget. The smirk that had seemed so permanent at the start of dinner now wavered, subtle cracks forming in his confident facade. It started with a cough. He paused mid-sentence, clearing his throat a little too forcefully, then another. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the glass of water, and I noticed because I had been watching, always watching. I said nothing. I smiled faintly, serene, almost motherly. To anyone else, I was the picture of composure. To him, though, I was a predator disguised as prey. His face flushed, the grin vanishing, replaced by confusion, then panic. My daughter noticed, her brows knitting together in concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Yeah, he faltered, but the words wouldn't come. His fingers twitched over the fork, as though realizing too late that the bite he had taken, or perhaps the one he hadn't, is the problem. I reached for my own fork, slowly, deliberately, taking the tiniest bite from my dish, not the swapped one. I allowed my eyes to meet his for a fraction of a second, calm and calculating, letting him feel the weight of my gaze. The subtle message was unmistakable. *I am in control. You are not. Then it became clear. He had eaten my special dish, the one I had swapped so carefully. Whatever he had planned for me, the humiliation, the subtle poison, the joke, had boomeranged, and now the consequences unfolded. He coughed violently, clutching at his throat. Panic overtook him. My daughter rose from her seat, eyes wide, but before she could react, I interjected with calm authority. "Sit down, dear," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It will pass." The irony was delicious. The proud, mocking man who had thought himself untouchable now squirmed under the weight of his own scheme. His face twisted with disbelief and frustration, realizing that the one he had tried to humiliate had been one step ahead all along. I felt no joy in watching him suffer physically. That would have been petty. But the satisfaction of seeing his arrogance shattered, the realization that his pride had been his undoing, was a pleasure I could not hide. He swallowed uncomfortably, eyes darting between my calm demeanor and my daughter's concerned expression. And in that moment, I knew something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, he was uncertain. For the first time, he realized that he could not control everything, that cunning and patience could match even his arrogance. I leaned back, taking another measured bite of my own plate, savoring the taste of vindication. My daughter reached across, holding my hand, and I felt a quiet warmth. She had no idea how close she had come to seeing me fall, or worse, how close I had come to letting him humiliate me. The son-in-law, still recovering, could only stare at me, his pride wounded more deeply than any physical discomfort, his confidence eroded by the simple truth. He had been outsmarted, and I had done nothing more than wait, observe, and act with precision. No shouting, no confrontation. Just quiet, calculated patience. I smiled faintly, a smile that did not need to show teeth to convey triumph. Revenge, I realized, is far sweeter when it is subtle, when it strikes without warning, when it teaches a lesson not through anger, but through inevitability. For an hour he had believed he was the puppet master. Now he was the fool in his own play, and I was finally free of the tension and fear that had weighed on me for too long. The consequences were complete. The house was quiet after the chaos of the meal. My daughter had returned to the kitchen to fetch dessert, her brow furrowed but trusting me to handle the situation. My son-in-law sat frozen at the table, still pale, still stunned by the turn of events. He dared not look at me, and I did not look at him. There was no need. The message had already been delivered. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders, leaving behind a clarity I hadn't known in years. Revenge is a strange thing. It is not satisfaction alone. It is recognition, acknowledgement, and the reclamation of dignity that had been eroded by someone else's arrogance. Tonight I had done more than teach him a lesson. I had reminded myself that I still possessed the power to protect, to act, and to assert my presence without apology. My daughter returned, her hands laden with dessert. She glanced at her husband, confusion and worry mixing in her eyes, then at me, sensing something had changed in the atmosphere. "Everything okay?" she asked cautiously. I smiled gently, the smile of someone who had endured and overcome. "Yes, dear, everything is fine." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment, perhaps sensing the weight of what had occurred. Then she nodded and moved to serve dessert, leaving me with the quiet victory I had earned. The son-in-law finally spoke, his voice low, almost reverent in its shift. I didn't expect. I cut him off softly, almost kindly. "Expect what? That I would fall for your games, that patience and calm are weaknesses." He hesitated, swallowing hard. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes, the understanding that arrogance, cruelty, and smugness are fragile things, easily shattered when met with vigilance and quiet strategy. I felt no desire to humiliate him further. That was never my intention. My victory lay not in public shame, but in the quiet, undeniable truth. I had taken control of my own fate, defended my dignity, and restored the balance he had tried to tip in his favor. As the evening drew to a close, I lingered in the warmth of my daughter's living room, sipping tea, listening to her chatter about mundane things, the trivialities of daily life. I realized then that liberation is not in revenge alone. It is in reclaiming peace, in being unshaken by someone else's attempt to dominate or belittle you. I thought of the past, of the small injustices and the subtle slights that had accumulated over the years, and I smiled not with bitterness, but with understanding. Those memories no longer had power over me. I had transformed them into awareness, into strategy, into a quiet strength. Later, when I left the house and stepped into the cool night air, I felt lighter than I had in years. The stars shimmered above, indifferent but comforting, as if they too approved of the balance restored. The lesson was simple, yet profound. Patience, intelligence, and composure are weapons far more potent than anger or rashness. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free not only from the arrogance and schemes of a man who underestimated me, but from the weight of fear and resentment I had carried. I walked home slowly, savoring the quiet triumph, knowing that sometimes the sweetest victory is not loud or violent, but measured, subtle, and entirely deserved. I had survived, I had endured, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and unshakably in control.